Hi everyone, this is going to be our lecture on Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. It was a play that came out in, I think, 1949, was it? 1959, excuse me. I'm glad I checked myself on that. Okay, and, this play would have been, Hansberry is basically trying to present she had absolutely but you know what, I don't know for a fact this is true, but I'd be very surprised. I think she was even in New York at the time if she hadn't gone to see Death of a Salesman, Arthur Miller's great play, and I sense there's some influence here. She's at the very least making the sort of African American version of the American Dream play here, very different, plenty of similarities actually with Miller's work, but also definitely her own. This is definitely an original in her own work. Hansberry had a very interesting life. Actually, she born in 1930 to parents who in Chicago, to parents who would come in, immigrated to Chicago sort of from the South. They were fleeing the Jim Crow South during the Great Migration. And to give a little context there, listen, the quick sweeping view of Black history in America. Read we have what is it, 1619, I believe, is Jamestown and the first slaves. 1865, you get the Emancipation Proclamation. The Great Migration that we'll get back to in a second was, I guess, considered from 1910 to 1970, and that is when a lot of the people, just had it with the Jim Crow South, kind of flee to the northern cities. And again, after 1860, after the Emancipation Proclamation, the end of the Civil War, the slaves are freed, but you do get the Jim Crow after, I guess, about 10 years or so. And I wonder if they even got that long. You get a sort of God, you get a sort of rollback of black rights. Listen, white people control the entire economy. They're all the bankers. They control all the purse strings. They control every governing board. And control where people get moved. I mean, so it is a sort of a softer. It's not slavery, but it is apartheid. Essentially, everything below the Jim Crow South, right up into the 1950s, 60s. By the way, this is not ancient history. Um, and then you get, and then in the mid 20th century, we get our threshold, a lot of those threshold moments there for the 20th century civil rights movement, right? In 1947, you get Jackie Robinson from my hometown of Stanford, which I don't think celebrates him enough. But I tell you what, that's a tough son of a bitch. Went out there 154 times by himself as the only black, and with what had like cauldrons of fucking hatred at the time, and sort of nobody marched with Jackie Robinson. Again, 1947. That is a full 7 years before Brown v. Board, and then I think another year or two we get in 54, I believe, and I think, what is it, 55, 56, we start getting Emmett Till. We've had the Montgomery bus boycott, and a talented and shockingly eloquent preacher by the name of Martin Luther King Jr. from Georgia shows up on the scene, and American history it really has changed. And I think, what is it, 64, 65, I guess, is the Voting Rights Act, and this basically the Civil Rights Bill by the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, which is maybe the last sort of macro institutional sort of ending of racial segregation and racism. I mean, the racism isn't really a law. So, and what we've been left with since is obviously a wake. That's left a residue in a wake, and that we still haven't gone through. But what again, from 1910 to 1910, again, the Hansberry's parents would have been a part of this, and the Youngers, who were going to be the family we're going to go through this play with, were the mama in this play. Was a part of this Great Migration, and that's where you do get, had it with the South, where they had to be, I mean, maybe I'll give you the Emmett Till story really quick. A lot of you, I'm sure, know this, but Emmett Till was a young, kid from Chicago, by the way. And again, Chicago, it's not that black people were equal, but they're bouncing off each other in the subways and, rooting for the same sports teams and working oftentimes shoulder to shoulder in some of those butcher shops and everything. It is different. And even if it isn't equal, and it isn't, it's a lot closer to equality than what you have the Jim Crow South. I mean, black guy can kind of get into it. You can be drinking in a bar, white dude get into a fight. The black guy's not going to get strung up from a fucking tree, later, probably. In Chicago, down south, you just look the wrong way, or don't get off the the black. Put it this way, a white woman could be walking with her little boy, and the black man is expected to step off the curb and into the street to let them pass by. And the Emmett Till story was an awful one, and that is Emmett Till was 14 years old and maybe a little bit cocky, as a lot of 14-year-old boys tend to be, and used to living in Chicago and not in the deep south, but he used to go down there. It was a relative he was visiting there, and I guess he summered there sometimes with his relatives on their farm, and essentially, the story goes that he was flirting with a young white's wife, who's very young, like 19, 20 years old, of someone in town. And, by the way, what was remarkable, yet just in the last few years, a historian tracked this woman down who was, I think, then in an old folks home in their late 80s or something, and she basically admitted that it never even happened. So to just to add insults to tragedy here. Anyway, white men show up at the door with I think in the hoods that night to drag poor Emmett out into the woods. At shotgun point. Takes him right in front of his family. Takes him out to the woods. Beat him to a. I think they tied him to a tree or something. Beat him to a pulp. I basically beat him to death, and then and I'm sorry to then get ready for this. This is a grisly detail, but I think it needs to be said. They literally, with a knife, cut the kid's penis off and put it in his mouth, wrap him in barbed wire, and they dump him in the lake. And I'm sorry to tell you such a grisly story, but I think it's important to realize just how fucked up, things were at that point. And anyway, that is the Jim Crow South, and a lot of people understandably fleeing there. But again, the people who flee the Jim Crow South and the Great Migration are the ones who still have, quite a muscle there pumping beneath the breastplate, right? I mean, they're the people who still have a lot of will left and talents, and they're driven. And so you get a lot of talent sort of migrating into these northern cities. And where do they go again? They go to they tend to, not they go all over, but they mostly, or not mostly, but the most populace of the end up settling into northern cities where the good jobs are, right? In New York, and you get the Harlem Renaissance, right? And what you do is you get this remarkable African-American artistic flourishing in some of these cities. And again, you get the Harlem Renaissance, and again, the Langston Hughes part of that, who gives his name, whose poem will give his name to this play, right? And it's a poet very much about festering sort of rage and anger and whether it will explode or not. And again, that there's real festering rage, especially within Walter in our play. But you get the Harlem and the Apollo and the Cotton Club, and just amazing. It still is a real, maybe the cultural hub of African American life in this country. And Detroit is another place, because the auto plant's there, and you can get a livable wage and earn a decent living. And have a way better life than sharecropping down south, and again there you start getting a lot of blues musicians, and again what the artistic form, the artistic expression of choice for the most part, not entirely. We've got some great black writers, for example, but most of that comes 20th century later, because they weren't even allowed to read. It was until the 1865, and So you do get some writers and some painters and things coming, but most of that comes in the 20th century. And but what they were always allowed to do was sing, right? And they brought that percussive. A lot of it there was this sort of echoes of the percussive rhythms and songs from the homeland in Africa. And they become this call and response music from the slave fields, right? Which evolves into the great Delta blues, and it's also going to be in Chicago, which I'll get back to in a second. And those blues eventually evolve into the Motown, and soul, and Motown was just one of the great, amazing sort of factories of pop music in this country. An amazing amount of hits. And in Chicago, where the Hansberrys are going to move, you get all those great blues musicians and Muddy Waters and the little Walter and the Howlin' Wolf. And again, go put on Howlin' Wolf. Do yourself a favor. Amazing music. And, it really does sound kind of like proto rock and roll, right? So, I mean, they really are. You do get some amazing arts coming out of these places. But you also get a lot of people just looking for a better life. And the Hansberrys, Lorraine Hansberry's parents, are two of these people that come on up into Chicago. And Lorraine Hansberry's father is a kind of a world beater and becomes a sort of an African American captain of industry, and becomes basically real estate becomes his business. And you're getting on a white flight from the neighborhoods all these black people are moving into, and the property values go down. He buys a lot of apartments on the cheap. He rents them out. He's a very capable man, extremely successful. Not universally popular because he's honestly as a slum, as a landlord in the slums and in the the ghetto, not so much better than he didn't necessarily treat his tenants. A lot of people thought any better than the white landlords did. And then we got to talk about the housing covenants, is what they call them in Chicago. The housing covenants were some of it was law, much of it was custom, where basically blacks had their side of town, and they really weren't allowed to live on the white side of town. And at time, if there wasn't, I don't know if there was. I'm not totally familiar actually with all the laws here. I doubt there was actually a law against them moving there. What there would have been was there would not have been a law against keeping them from moving there. And again, all the bankers would have been white. They would, it would have been well known that you do not give, a mortgage for a black family in the white side of town, and there was no law stopping that. Put it that way. And it was that sort of thing. And all the public housing, there was a certain amount of it always got put up, on the side, and Chicago would have been the south side. And this, again, it happens throughout the country, which is why, if you live near where many of my students here, say Stanford or Norwalk, it is, we all know, if I asked you where the black side of town is, we would all know, right? And then there's a real history. And again, those covenants were basically the origin point of the American inner city as we know it, in which we still have not really rid ourselves of. We're still not a completely integrated society, right? But this is a time when it was extremely sort of integrated. And again, Lorraine Hansberry's father he actually ran for Congress at one point. Again, this is an educated man, when a lot of black folk wouldn't have been then, and confident, strident guy who's very successful, and who was actually, although he was very much a businessman and looked out for himself, he also was extremely involved in civil rights and furthering, the cause of black Americans. And he moves his family and challenges these covenants and moves his family to a white, finds a house, finds a way to get in there, and buys the house. He's got the money to do it, and eventually he finds someone. I don't know the entire story, but the family does end up moving there. It was not easy, and Lorraine Hansberry told stories about her mother having to, because the father would be out all night working. He was very involved in the community. He was always doing things. He had a business. He was a bit of a politician. And he'd be out all night at meetings and things, and the mother would have to stand at the door with a loaded shotgun, or handgun maybe, guarding, them. And so, I mean, it was harrowing. And she got spit on going to school, Lorraine Hansberry, when she was very young. All kinds of foul, horrible things said to them. And at one point, she's on her couch in the living room, and a brick, people would chant outside their house, and a brick came flying through the window and lodged right into the wall next to her head, just missed her head, I guess, by less than a foot. So this, and anyway, all this is where the foundations of the story we're about to read, right? Now, again, she's also wants this to be a universal sort of story, universal black person story, though, right? And again, this is going to be the Black American Dream play, and unlike, it is not going to quite be the cynical tragedy that Miller's Death of a Salesman is going to be, right? And boy, is that ever the strain. And just a remarkable, heroic fucking strain through African American art. Just there is always hope. I mean, it just feels so good. It's why it feels so good. I think the listener, hope is the sort of nourishment. I think the emotional nourishment people need to keep going, and especially when things are bad. And so I guess black folk needed it more than anyone. That's why they were so drawn to Christianity, right, which offers the afterlife and with a code of conduct, and their music it just always seems celebrating. Even their saddest songs is somehow life affirming, right? And that's always kind of run through it. And boy, is that that blue note, right? That I think Cornel West would sort of put it, is running through this play. And what we have is a family here, right? And they are a sort of prototypical Black American family as Hansberry sees it. And her play was, we can be just as complicated, just as tragic as white people, and I want to show people that. And by the way, when this play opened on Broadway, it was a huge success. That is not always true of all the writers we cover in this course, but and every black actor wanted to be in this play, man. And she got some great ones. There was Ruby Dee, who... the one movie, she's an old, I don't even know if she's old, I think she passed, but Ruby Dee, I mean, a tiny little fucking powerhouse of a woman. If you see American Gangster with Denzel Washington, again, Denzel Washington is a really formidable film actor. God, he's struggling to fucking stay on the screen with this tiny little woman, whenever they have a scene together. And worth the rent or the finding it on wherever. I don't know if it's on Netflix or HBO or somewhere now, but I'm sure it can be found. But again, that's American Gangster. If you want to just get a quick view of Ruby Dee, but also listen, but anyway, they were lined up around the block to be in this play. Anyway, so it had a lot of buzz. It made a lot of success. It won awards. It hit the zeitgeist. It did everything. So again, it made her very, I guess briefly a bit of a famous woman. She was kind of a strident individualist herself. Married a white Jewish guy. And seemed to have a fairly happy marriage. Lived in New York, lived in Greenwich Village, and was kind of an activist her entire life. Kind of gave it to JFK apparently in one meeting they had in the White House one time about civil rights. So she was a formidable woman. But back to the Youngers now. This play is going to be about the Youngers, and this is going to be the play of I guess housing. Discrimination and the American inner city, and where it sort of comes from, and again something we're still dealing with. The Youngers live in a duplex that's almost like a tenement kind of building. Well, not a building though. I guess it's a duplex, which is two sort of apartment. A house sort of split into two different apartments on it, and it's a rundown. Section of town. There's one scene where the young son is Travis is out with a bunch of other boys with a baseball bat or something going on, they're trying to whack a rat around in the street. So, I mean, that's the kind of things these people are dealing with. They spray for roaches every Saturday. We also learn they have to share a bathroom. And I mean, boy, that is, grown, if you're grown up and you're paying your rent to your own place, no one wants to share a bathroom with a neighbor. I mean, that is extremely, undignified. So the lack of dignity on these people is sort of apparent from the start. And it's also when Hansberry goes out of her way to say that this house is neat and tidy. They're clean. These are really prideful people. And what has happened to get this story going is that Mr. Younger, who is apparently quite a man and quite a patriarch, he's described as a large, sort of strapping guy. He has died, and there is life insurance, and there's $10,000, which would have been, I'm guessing, worth close to, I don't know, 30 to 50 or something $1,000 in today's money. And anyway, a lot more money than these poor people have ever seen. And boy, that money, and again, the thing that's always been kept from, or one of the things, has always been kept from African Americans, and the single, and the way you get ahead in a capitalist society, and the way you gain security for yourself and your family is through acquisition of capital, right? And so, and again, what had to happen for them is the patriarch of the family had to die. So that's the first thing, right? Is that this is no longer a patriarch or a patriarch. It seems like it was actually pretty. It sounded, and again, you don't get that much information on this. It seems my mom is kind of a force, so I would imagine it was a real partnership there. But the man of the house is gone, and again, that is. That has real meaningful sort of weight for African Americans. Lots about a child. Again, when you put people under the pressures of poverty, and especially the kind of oppressive poverty and all the indignity and and the history and ancestry that are sort of going into it. But in the case of the African American experience, men, don't deal well with being powerless and not being able to go out and make their way in the world. We see that, listen, even today, right? The kids without, even just from single, parent households where it's only the mother, boys tend to have a much higher rate of incarceration and things like that. Even though there are obviously a lot of women doing just heroic jobs there, it's that much. It's hard to raise a child, and boys do kind of need fathers too. I mean, it's not absolute, but it's more true than not true, put it that way. And Walter's, who's the son and now I guess the de facto man of the house, is feeling all this, right? And we see this from Walter in the way he acts, and he gets caught. And again, Benitha, he is mad, boy, right? She says to him at one point, and he's talked about by being mad or crazy several times, and there's just this sort of anxiousness, and there's this sort of simmering, and again we go back to the Langston Hughes poem that's the play gets its name from. What happens, to a dream deferred, right? Again, this is the American dream play for the African Americans. Does it sugar over? I forget. Does it turn sugary and sweet? I wish I had this more in my memory. But anyway, does it like pus? Swell, or does it anyway? The last lines are, or does it explode? And boy, Walter does feel like he is about to explode, right? He's constantly, he's full of sort of this not quite rage. I actually don't think he's in that sense of rage in him, although what we are sensing is it's turning, and it's turning. Walter's turning dark, and it's going to become rage. What he's filled with right now is mostly just this frustration that again is about to over-ripen, in time into a kind of rage. And again, that is the story of the sort of emasculated African American male who cannot go out and earn an honest living. He does not have a fair chance. And again, Walter spends his days going going through it. If you see I actually thought it's on free on YouTube, the one with Danny Glover plays Walter, which I don't think is the best version, but it shows him putting on his uniform, and boy, these white gloves, and it's just, he looks kind of ridiculous and clownish in it, and you can tell he's just fucking humiliated just putting this thing on, and he basically has to drive a white guy around all over town and like open, yes sir, no sir, and sort of open and close doors from him and give him name as an Andy routine. It's Walter's suffering a lot, and he's extremely friends. By the way, Sidney Poitier, I don't think I even mentioned, maybe the greatest black actor, American black actor of the 20th century, was the original younger in that play. So again, she had real, best of the best of the best in that cast. Anyway, so Walter is just like he's vibrating, and he's just freaking out, and he's getting caught, and he does feel like even says he feels like he's going crazy, and the frustration is getting to him, and it's making him kind of short out, and he makes terrible decisions. He wants to his dreams he wants to take, and again, this money almost sits there. It's a little bit like the Ring in Lord of the Rings. They're all, it's just this. Oh my God, this temptation that can make so many of what they wanted come true. And you've got the various dreams, right? You've got a mama who just wants to get a home for their family, right? She's got to dignify stuff, but she's an older woman. But you got the young man, Walter, who wants to, and he wants to get a liquor store, and he's drinks too much as it is. I don't know if getting a liquor store would be the best thing for him to have anyway. However, to be fair to Walter, liquor stores are known to turn quite a nice profit margin. And people always drink, and honestly, in neighborhoods like the good times and bad, they drink to celebrate, and they drink to drown their sorrows. And if anything, they probably drink even more when they're under the kind of there's more you go into the poorest neighborhoods, regardless of skin pigmentation, and people who maybe would be there's all these kinds of these people maybe who are living in middle class or wealthy neighborhoods who could go the wrong way, right? Who could steal things and break the law, and they don't, because and then you put them under the pressure of poverty, and they tip over and they do go into criminality. Same thing with alcoholism and things like that. So it does exacerbate these sorts of common universal problems among communities. And Mama sees, she sees alcohol is devastated a lot of people around them. She doesn't want to be that, and Walter's just seeing it as a business opportunity. And I don't think, again, I think Walter's a good guy. He's a bit of a fuck up, but I have a lot of sympathy for Walter myself, and he wants to, because he wants to be the man of the house. He wants to take care of everyone. He doesn't want his mother taking care of him anymore, and it's killing him. But Mama sees that he's not quite right, and she loves him, and she wants him to be, but she's not giving him the reins, and she's sort of, as long as he's in her house, and again, he has to live with his wife in his mama's house, right? His son sleeps on a pull-out, out in the living room. Travis, who's 10 or 11 years old. Again, he and Ruth, no privacy. They want to, couple together as a man woman. They have to do it in a sort of muffled sort of way in the other room, right? That's hard. Nobody wants to live like that. So again, he can't even fully be a man in the bedroom, right? With his wife, his mother's literally on the other side of the wall, and I think I'm not sure, but I think either beneath him or either his sister or his mother is. But Ruth, who's Walter's long-suffering wife, right, who goes and has it worse than Walter, by the way. She's on her hands and knees scrubbing people's floors. She's a maid, basically, for white people. And, boy, she gets up, and without really any complaints, she's the first one up. And again, so much of and again, with men often sort of self-immolating and self-destructing in African American society, women have been often the born tremendous burden of not just rearing children, but holding the house together and holding a lot together, frankly. And by the way, the civil rights movement in the mid-20th century. Boy, that was driven by women, and then along comes Martin Luther King Jr. and a lot of good women kind of get shunned sort of out. If someone like that shows up, you got to give him the mic and let him go. And it was the right thing to do, I think. But probably a lot of women got forgotten about in that movement. And anyway, they were always the noble and the strong. They're amazingly strong. And we have Ruth, who again she has to wake up her son, who's tired. He's overly tired because Walter was in there playing cards or whatever, drinking in the living room with his friends, his buddies the night before. But she does manage to get the kid, and you see her making everyone breakfast, and you just see a extremely competent and just sort of beautiful human being, right? And mother, and who's had a little bit. You get this sort of very entertaining sort of marital spat. With the husband, who she's kind of tired of listening to carry on, and you get Walter kind of lashing at her. And he often universalizes when he's talking to her, right? These people really are sort of black, African American archetypes. That's what's with the black women in this country. They never support their men and that sort of thing. I'm the only one with vision, he'll later say, because he's dying to get this business deal with the liquor store going. But then later we get Beneatha. Then we'll come out, and Beneatha is boy, what a character, actually, and then a lot. She's got a lot in her too. And again, Walter's also surrounded by 3 extraordinarily strong women, and he's really not up to. He's not any one of their equals, much less when they're all in there with him, right? So he's got it done. But if he would let them, I think they would make him a much better man. I think eventually they do. But Beneatha is a young black girl who's a very sort of a black pride, and is in medical school, which I assure you, very few black. There was no one who. I bet there wasn't even another black guy, in her school. Or if there was, it was 1 or 2, in her classes. And so, boy, just that she's doing this, and that she's been doing it now for a little bit, and that she has no plans on stopping, is showing you this woman is made of. She's got quite a lot of fiber in her being, right? And she's very bright, but she is young and also immature, and she's got that young. That sort of a superciliousness young students often take, especially with their parents and older people who really are wiser, but who do not have the education. And Mama, again, was went from the plantation, or not that kind of plantation, but sharecropping, whatever, down south, to here, and for her, and she doesn't know anything about all these things that Beneatha is learning, and but Beneatha is very proud. She's very civil rights conscious, and again, this play is put on in '59. We are right in the tumult of it, of all that. Martin Luther King, and the Montgomery bus boycott, and the Little Rock Nine, and the Woolworths count, which I think is actually a little later. But it's still, there is a real foment when this play comes out, and so she is steeped in this, and is very civil rights sort of conscious. We do get an interesting scene later. I'll get back to that with her and Walter, but. She also has 2 suitors. One is George, who's a light-skinned black man from a very wealthy, prominent family, who's, Beneatha, I think, says at one point, the only thing more snobby than a white rich person is a black rich person, and he does seem to. He has this very patrician sort of a way of speech. At least that's how it was played, I think, in both versions I've seen. And he's just sort of dry and very practical and sort of status obsessed and superior, and it seems to very much treats the youngers like they're beneath him. They're extremely impressed with him and taken with him, and are constantly trying to sort of impress and please him. Beneatha not so impressed with him, and there's a second suitor. There's 2 of them. The second suitor is a Sagai, who's an African immigrant who's going to school with her, and again is from the homeland, and is he kind of gets at her for cutting her hair, not letting her hair be more natural, and doesn't and is basically a black man who has not been under any of the oppression of American blacks, and has no problem seeing himself as equal to any white person. and has this kind of booming voice, and boy, there's a masculinity to him too, and he really dotes on her, but he dotes on her from a place of strength somehow. Where George is always sort of like confused as to why she isn't completely falling all over him. A poor girl like that getting a chance to marry a rich guy, and thinks she ought to consider it a privilege, and doesn't always like listening to her talk. And the side guy loves talking to her. But again, there's a strength and a masculinity to him. And boy, he gets her blood going in a way the other guy does not. It's obvious which one she's sort of drawn to, in a powerful, both a romantic and I think erotic sense. And then we get Mama, who is about as lovely and warm and heroic a human being as we're going to come across all semester. And it's a woman who's known plenty of suffering and has survived a lot, and she's buried a husband recently, and she's got a family she's really worried about, her children she's really worried about, and they're living in a neighborhood that's sort of terrible, and she's got this little plant, this wilted little plant that she keeps carrying around and putting water. She's trying to, again, she's the nurturer, right? She keeps trying to nurture that plant back to life. And her and Ruth, Walter's wife, have a very close relationship, and seem to be the two adult women kind of holding this house really together. Because beneath 20 and very bright and educated, but she's still sort of a child and a bit immature. She gets, at one point, Mama warns her, but she better, she's talking about God in a way that she doesn't believe in God, and and Mama's not forbidding, making her believe. She's like, you're not going to talk like that in my house. And she keeps, you got to get your jaw slapped, and she does, and then boom, Mama sort of slaps her and sort of straightens her out, and it's kind of a tough scene there with beneath it. Walter is fighting with Mama because he wants that money. She's really not looking to give to him for a liquor store, but in the end, she wants to make a man out of her son, and she does let him have the money. She's like, and she says, "Listen, $3,900 is for, I think it was, beneath his education, and I need $3,500 for, or maybe it was 3,500, whatever it was, for." The down payment for that house, and she that's what she does. She buys him the house, and she buys him the house in Clybourne Park, which is a white neighborhood. And they're like, Clybourne Park, and they're all like, whoa. I'm like, well, all right, that's I'm sure that they're not going to welcome us, and they don't. But again, but how that goes about is sort of interesting too. Mama says, she's like, I looked for nicer houses around here. They were all too expensive. They were actually cheaper. A decent house was cheaper in the white neighborhood, which is sort of amazing. But it was just all the gouging and everything that going on. She wasn't basically just buying a home for her family. The one home she could afford. She was not looking to move into it. She'd have rather not done it. But just doing that ended up being this sort of a huge political statement. And even though she didn't want to make one. And so you can see how trapped sort of in their circumstances a bit the poor youngers are. And we do get a visit from Carl Linder, is the man's name, who say, again, this sort of figure can be traced right back to the long history in literature of the tempter figure, right back to Satan himself in the Bible, in the Old Testament, I suppose, right? Get thee behind me, Satan, who tries to tempt Jesus in the garden, right? And Carl Linder is the tempter figure, and he comes in, and by the way, he's not presented as an horrible human being. He's sort of uncomfortable with the situation he's in too, but he does offer them money. Basically, he offers to pay them for their house, and actually 10% more than they just paid. They would have made a quick 10% money if they would just sell the house and go move, in a non-white neighborhood, basically go back to the black place. But again, to take that money, what is that saying? And boy, they initially, they're all, beneath Walter and Ruth are the ones in the room with their mamas out of the house. They kind of make fun of him and toy with him and get him right out of the house. They handled it amazingly. But again, to take that, but then later, after Walter he gets into a bad deal with bad people who run off with his money. And he not only gave him the money, he gave him he gave him, I think, beneath his money as well. The only money he didn't give away was Mom had already put the down payment on the house. So Beneath is hating him, and Mama actually beats him, and it's just an awful sort of scene. And then his scheme to sort of try to fix all this is to, well, I'll call that guy Carl Linder and we'll take the money. And Mama, ever the wise woman, sort of puts her son right up front with him. She's like, if you're gonna do it, you're gonna sign that money, right in front of your son while he's watching, and he can't do it. And he tells Mr. Linder, we'll be good neighbors, and we're not looking to make, we're not looking to make any statements. But it's our home, and we bought it, and we have a right to it, and that's sort of how the play ends. But boy, if he had taken that money, what is it saying? He is saying, you can just give me money and I'll accept that I'm less than. It really is selling your soul, from them. And again, the whole point of the play, which is we are equal, right? And again, it's an admission that they weren't. So it was a big deal if he would have taken that money. And he doesn't. And the play ends with Mama. Everyone's sort of, they're moving, and everyone's kind of going out one by one, and Walter and Beneath are bickering in sort of a funny, charming way. And, Mama says to Ruth, and again, these two women have been shoulder to shoulder running this household. And she's like, well, boy, they something else, my children. Ain't they something else? And Ruth says, they something, Lena, they something. And she goes out, and what was just a very touching last moment. And you have Mama just all alone in the house and looking over this place she's raised her family in. And she's finally, and they have struggles ahead of them, but things are, you get the sense that the youngers are going to persevere and be okay through their struggles. There's real hope at the end of this play. And Mom, as she's looking over the empty apartments, kind of puts her, bites down on her fist, and tears well up. An old that struggle. This is a woman who came, right out of the Jim Crow South, and has been through so much, and and managed to get this house for them all. And they're now leaving, and again, she has that emotional moment at the end, and the last thing she does, she goes and she picks up that little wilted plant, which is a little less wilted now, and take it with her. And that is the end of Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry.